Hey everyone, welcome back to Breakthrough, a Dale Carnegie podcast. My name is Faith Wright, and we have my co-host here today, Neville DeLucia. And we have an awesome guest today. We are super excited. We're recording here and it's early, but our guest is just so sweet and came on with such a great attitude. And so we really appreciate that and are excited to get to hear from her this morning. You know, this podcast is really for young adults, Gen Z, and educators and parents of Gen Z, looking to hear from trailblazers in the space, leaders to inspire and encourage. And today we get to hear from a NC State grad. Ritika Shamdasani is one of the sisters and co-founders behind Sani, that is an apparel brand inspired by South Asian culture. And I'm so excited to get more info about all of this, learn about her experience and just how she has built and launched this evening wear for Indian weddings into broaden into casual categories like loungewear, and it's just grown exponentially on TikTok. We've done now, she said, Rent the Runway in April and launched in Nordstrom. So it's been so cool to see the progress. The clothes have been featured in places like the Today Show, which is epic, and Forbes and New York Times. So thank you so much, Ritika, for being here. And we are so cool. Would you just share about how you got started with Sani, how that idea came to be? Was it in college at NC State? Right after you graduated? Just give us kind of the lowdown of how it got started.
Yeah, of course. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to be on this podcast. But Sani actually started more as a passion project with my sister, very much like side hustle situation. And it started because Nikki and I were actually shopping for an Indian wedding, and we hadn't gone to an Indian wedding in a while. So we tried to shop in the US versus like growing up, we were always used to going to India, like visiting our grandmother there, shopping when we were there, and then just kind of stocking up on outfits until the occasions came. So this time when we tried to shop in the US, we traveled to major South Asian hubs 2+ hours away. We ordered on eBay, and what the product was definitely did not match the pictures online. And then we even tried WhatsApp video calling my grandmother, who at the time still lived in India, but she's a lovely woman who doesn't really understand like front camera from back camera. So that ended pretty terribly. And so when we dug into this experience a little bit deeper, we realized there was a lot of first and second generation South Asian Americans who were like us, and specifically 82% of South Asian Americans wait to go abroad to shop for their cultural clothing. So that was the first original problem context we actually really fell in love with. And so being that I was actually not even in college yet, Nikki and I took it as a like side hustle. We're going to do this out of our parents' basement. I thought, oh, this will be great, like cash flow while I'm like in college. Like this is perfect. And it kind of stayed like that side hustle situation. We didn't pay that much attention to it, but I would say 2020, when I now was in college, Nikki had moved now from New York to North Carolina and was still taking on some jobs, but not any full-time jobs. That's when we kind of flipped the switch from it just being this passion project to a full-on company.
I think it's stunning that you found a niche, right? Very often in business, people say find a niche, find a process, but you're also using the words passion project. So if you think about people that want to get into work, or they're studying something and they're trying to find a career in a place, how important is being passionate about what you do or loving what you do to being successful in your opinion?
I think it's everything. I think it's everything partly because no matter what you're doing, you're going to have a lot of highs and a lot of lows, and you can't focus on those, like the lows or the highs. Like instead you have to come back to always like what's true. And it's like you're in love with like this problem you're solving, or this industry that you're in, or the work that you do. And then that kind of keeps you grounded and doesn't let those things really get to you.
Yeah, I'm
I
sure.
think that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm sure that it can be so easy to have like these hard times come. And if you're not passionate about it, then it's going to be really hard to keep going, amidst the trials that come. Has there been any times that you've felt like, oh, maybe this isn't worth it? Maybe we should just go do something else. It's been fun. Like, I'm curious about the mindset there. Like, have you always just stayed steadfast in it? No, you're shaking your head. Okay.
No, I feel like if there's any founders out there who have always been steadfast, like kudos to you. But I don't think that exists. And to actually be specific, so when we took Sani seriously, really in 2020, right around February of 2020 is when we launched on Rent the Runway as their first South Asian fashion brand. That was a huge partnership for us. We sold out of booking availability in 48 hours. They were placing another reorder within the next 2 days. I was in my freshman or sophomore year of college. I was like, I'm dropping out, guys. Like, this is it. And and then a few weeks later, the pandemic hit. And initially then we were just a brand focused on like things people wore to Indian weddings. So essentially like what we were doing became totally irrelevant. And I think in that moment, especially like seeing your like Shopify go down to like a negative number, like sitting here, like not knowing what's going to happen in the world. And after having just that like spike growth and it all comes crumbling down, like I had so many doubts in that moment. And so did my sister. We were both like, is this worth it? Like, is this our sign to like stop? Like, what's going on here? So I think it's a part of like, I think running a company.
It's great that you're talking about the tough times, because you were like, when you were getting these massive orders, when the business was coming in, you're like, oh my word, I want to get out. So sometimes there's the stress and pressure of success, not just of failure, right? So there's two channels. So I'm curious to know from you, if you were to give young entrepreneurs advice and say, when it's going really great or when it's going really tough, what advice would you give them in both those instances so that they can, hold their passion dear and pursue their dreams?
Yeah, I think that one of the best pieces of advice I've actually gotten about exactly what you're saying when it's really good or really bad is that you have to react to both situations the same. Like you can't let the highs bring you all the way up here, and then you can't let the lows bring you all the way down here. And I think this is like really good because like you never know the mix. You never know, like your next high might take 4 months versus you're just going to be in low, 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 low. But like if you maintain almost like this level-headed mindset, I think that helps a lot when the tough times do come, or maybe the amazing times come.
Yeah. Go ahead, Neville.
So I grew up in a family business, right? So I'm curious to know, there's a lot of people that maybe have brothers and sisters. They go, there's no way I would ever work with my sister or there's just no way. So tell us about yourself and Nikki, you said, right? So tell us about that relationship and how you work together and how do you deal with as siblings? In times I've seen siblings get pretty vocal and pretty abusive with each other.
Oh yeah.
So I'm curious. And the Indian families that I know, they can be pretty passionate about things, So I'm curious to learn a bit more about that relationship and how the two do work together.
Yeah, of course. And it's so funny you said you grew up in a family business, because I think what's relevant to our story is that my dad actually immigrated here from India in the 80s, and he came over here with his 7 brothers and sisters. Wow. And his 7 brothers and sisters actually started their own company. And I grew up around seeing like they were a completely bootstrapped business, right? Like they were 7 immigrants from India who like some of them barely spoke the language. Like it was like kind of building something from the ground up. And like now they're at a scale, which I'm like, how did you do that with the means that you were given at that point? But so like I didn't realize growing up, like if you told me go into your family business when I was in middle school or high school, I'd be like, no way, like never gonna happen. And I don't even think I realized growing up, like how much the aspect of them working with their siblings like rubbed off on me. But I will say one thing I did notice, and it stays true to this day, is they do a fantastic job of never letting like us see what's going on at the company. So they never would bring work problems home. If there was a family occasion that was like a dinner with my grandmother, if they were going in a tiff, if something had just happened that day, you would never know. Like it would never be a thing that is brought up. And in the end, their principle was that family comes first. And that was something they stayed true to. So I think Nikki and I obviously saw those principles firsthand growing up. We still weren't in the boat of we're going to start a company together, but it influenced us to, I think, go into business together because we saw how successful it could be. Now, in the beginning, we were not as good as them. We were definitely bringing fights to the dinner table. Like it wasn't like their messaging just like automatically stuck, but I think the whole principle of family comes first definitely did. And I think that's what's gotten us through a lot of the times, like you're saying, when we're arguing like cats and dogs, because we like come back to that principle. And ultimately, like it's what has made Sani successful because like no one knows you as well as your family member and your sister. And once you get past the hurdle of learning how to not only be sisters, but co-founders, I think there's a lot of like potential there because of like how personal that relationship already is and the fact that trust is just built in from day one.
Definitely. And it's not about having it perfect as soon as you start, but I love that you're so real with that. And it's a learning process. And it takes time to figure things out and to have something that works for you guys. You know your sister so well because of the family. Probably you've lived with her forever, right? How or you grew up together forever. How did you realize your strengths versus her strengths? And what would you say those are? And how did you work with both of your guys' strengths, knowing that she has these things that she's good at and you have these other things that you're good at?
So that also took us a little bit of time. So my sister Nikki is 7 years older than me, and she actually had like corporate experience. So she went to UNC Chapel Hill. She worked at Deloitte for a little bit. Then she worked at a startup accelerator, and then like she also was a professor at UNC. So she had kind of done some more than me, at least. And so like I think she came in kind of knowing what her skills were. But what's interesting is I think those skills also changed over time because of like the nature of our business. Now, me, on the other hand, I was like, I'm Gen Z, like I know like social media. So figuring out like what my skills were was also just like me learning how to do Sani while doing Sani. And ultimately, we actually have very complementary skills, but I think what's worked out the best is also we take projects together very well. And like when both of us are in a project, it's going to be an A++. Because we have the complementary skills. I would say hers, she's like the most detail-oriented person I have ever met. And she has like a very strong gut reaction when it comes to things. And I think that's something that like both of us have started to like really get better at. And I think both of those things like really help her. And then I would say I'm more like big picture vision, less detail oriented. And I'm more on the creative like marketing side as well.
One of the key things is knowing our places in a business, right? So we know what our places and leveraging those strengths. And it's wonderful to hear how you say that. So if you think about other siblings that want to get into business, or anyone, a person that wants to start a business with their best friend, right? sometimes we need breakthroughs. Someone's going to give us that lending hand or that helping hand. If you don't reflect on your career in this business, I say career because you started at Sunlight before you even went to college, right? So I'm calling that a career, right? So if people want to start a business right with their best friend, what is the breakthrough? If you think about, I had this break, I got this break, or this happened, this person gave us this. If you had to reflect on that career of yours, what might the breakthrough have been, or who was the person that gave you and your sister maybe that breakthrough, if you wouldn't mind sharing?
So I think it's funny that you say this because I also was always like, oh, it takes one moment to break through. And that's like how things just start making sense. But over time, I've realized that building a like strong business is a series of breakthroughs. And it's not necessarily focused on like connecting with the right person or getting the right partnership. It's about how all those pieces kind of come together as one like complete puzzle that ultimately like makes a beautiful picture. And I think Nikki and I have been really, really lucky to have met super supportive people that we are so grateful for and definitely don't deserve, who are willing to like drop everything at a moment's notice and like help us with the financial model in 24 hours. Or there's other people who like will be the ones to introduce us to like Nordstrom, who we launched with in April of 2023. But I think all of those pieces are kind of like equally important. And that's what I was going back to. Like the series of breakthroughs have been more beneficial. I can't actually pinpoint us to one person or one specific instance that's really like catapulted it. I would say like Rent the Runway, but then that essentially wasn't a breakthrough in the end because of like the timing. Like you would think that would be, but no.
Wow.
So as you consider the growth that has happened in the past couple of years, where do you see Sani going in 5 years, 10 years? Like, what is, because you're visionary, right? What is that vision? What is that goal that you see Sani being in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so we're considering Sani as more of a lifestyle brand now, and that's going to be seen in the next like 5 to 10 years. So we started off with apparel, but we have a lot of product expansion coming within apparel, like different categories within that, but then beyond that as well into like accessories, handbags, and then pushing that out a step further also into like collaborations in home furnishing and all that fun stuff. And then on top of that, we have a really big emphasis on partnerships. So looking to like grow that side of the business in terms of not only like partnering with a lot of cool like Fortune 500 companies to bring collaborations into play, but then also like in real life partnerships and events. Since we've been such a digital first brand and really haven't dove deep into any like in-person experiences. And for us, like the niche that we started off with this like Indian wedding wear market, we've pretty much conquered now. And so we're going to this like larger, broader audience. And we see now that like South Asian culture is in the zeitgeist with things like food and entertainment and sports. But this last piece of like fashion and like culture is kind of still missing. And so we're going to be the ones to really bring it to the mainstream to where it's going to be the same thing as like you go to an Indian restaurant once a week, like you come shop with Sani in the same way because it's like just synonymous.
Yeah, that's stunning. And where do you guys get your inspiration from for the clothing line, for the brand that you put in? Where does that inspiration come from?
Yeah, so we have a really fun design process in which every piece has to tell a story. And that's kind of like the principle that we start with whenever we're designing. Now, where the inspiration comes from that piece, that can be varied. It can come from, we've done an entire collection around a box that my mom was gifted during her wedding time. And then we're in the process of actually designing a piece that is inspired by my grandmother, and grandmother is Nani, like that's what I call her. And she had always, when we were like visiting her, and even to this day, she wears the most comfortable 90s, and they're like a piece of fabric that's just like baggy and big. And like whenever you were sick or you're going to her house, like you wore a 90 too. So we're also creating a piece like with her that's called Not Your Nani's 90. And it's just fun because it's almost like for us, we consider every product a new story, a new problem-solving context sometimes. So that's how we like to think about like design. And then the inspiration for that, like I said, comes from a box, or it comes from my grandmother, or it could come from like a pattern I see on the side of the road.
Oh, I love it. It's like the storytelling element where I'm sure whenever you really think about, people from your family or experiences growing up, or just like the culture that you have, you can pinpoint different stories to create a beautiful clothing line from, right? And
Yeah.
it makes it more personal and more fun. So I'm so glad you asked that question, Neville, because storytelling with clothing can have a big impact too, whether it's the name or the description under the product, right? So people get more, I guess the word is infused into the culture just by that storytelling aspect. If you had to give advice to parents of Gen Z or educators of Gen Z, what would that piece of advice be?
I think sadly, like in this day and age, like there's so much pressure to like be perfect and like uphold a certain like image. And I think a lot of that pressure comes from social media, right? You're like, what if my friends see this? Like, what if blah, 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 like knows what I'm doing? And since we are so like interconnected, like it's very easy for that to come out. But I think that almost creates blocks in our head and it makes us afraid to start. So like one of my favorite quotes is, fear overestimates the threat and underestimates your ability to deal with it. And in conjunction with that, I always like to say, don't be the one to tell yourself no. So I think as a parent or an educator or whatever role you're in with Gen Z, I think we live in a world where that has to be reiterated time and time again because of like what society's kind of changed into. So I would say that's probably like the number one piece of advice I have.
That's fantastic. I think one of the key things is to have that affirmation, because we, when we strive to be perfect, I think it makes it really challenging, and it kind of leans to your creativity of your clothing, telling the story through your brand and your creativity, because stories aren't perfect. Stories are there to create love and desire and passion, and I think that's really a beautiful thing to hear you say. I'm just curious. I think as we think about how we drive our business forward, and we think about the day-to-day things that we need to be doing, what would you say are your success factors for you and Nikki on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, I'm going to be really tactical with one. We need to stop checking our email so much. That is not a success factor, but I was actually having a conversation with someone about this because I'm like addicted to my inbox, I think. But I think being at the stage that we're in, we get caught up a lot in the day-to-day business of just running a business to where we don't have as much time to devote to the big picture of running a business. So now our strategy is to like make sure like it's a 60-40 split. Like 40% is running the business, 60% is thinking about like the big picture of the business. And that's actually something that's helped both of us, because then we're able to like make sure we're pushing forward and not just getting caught up and like staying stagnant. Which can be really hard at this stage, but that's something that we've tried to like
40-60,
implement on a daily basis.
Very reasonable, very doable, and very, very smart. And if I listen to how you're putting that together, it's been wonderful speaking with you. I just can't believe that our time is basically running up. I just can't believe it. So if our listeners want to get a hold of you, reach out to you, or get in contact with yourselves, so with you or Nikki for that matter, or the brand, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, of course. So brand wise, our Instagram is @Sani and our website is sani.co. You can also find us on TikTok @Sani Sisters. And then personal wise, I am also on Instagram. It's at Ritika Sham, and of course, like the whole LinkedIn thing. But I am happy to always like answer any DMs or talk to anyone. And I love like the audience level that your guys' podcast is at. So if there are any people that are around my age that are where I was before starting Sani, feel free to reach out to me.
Oh, that's very kind of you, and thank you. And, successful people want other people around them to be successful. That does speak to your leadership, which is great. So thanks so much for tuning in and listening to our podcast today. We are delighted to have got this. And remember, check out all the details. You'll find them in the message links below. And again, Ritika, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful hosting you. And so if you haven't followed us yet or liked us to get more of these inspirational stories, please do so now. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.